There's no way a poor guy in work clothes like you can afford a car from here. Yeah, but even if you say that, I plan to buy one. Sorry, sir. All the cars just sold out. Go home already. The salesperson waved his hand dismissively, shooing me away. I see. That's how you treat customers. It's a shame you missed a chance to boost your sales. After saying, then made a call to someone. No way. The salesperson's face turned pale and froze. My name is Chris Miller. I'm 61 years old. I live with my wife and run a farm I inherited from my in-laws. Surrounded by mountains and fresh air, I've completely adapted to this rural life. Now, I can't imagine living anywhere else. The first few years after inheriting the farm from my in-laws were tough. At first, my father-in-law was there to guide me, but soon after I took over, both he and my mother-in-law passed away. From then on, my wife and I had to manage the farm alone, and there were times when we struggled just to make ends meet. However, my wife and I never gave up. We worked together tirelessly, believing that things would eventually get better, and now we live a stable life. Originally, I was a businessman until 10 years ago, but due to certain circumstances, I couldn't continue. It was because of one particular person. Chris, you're completely useless. I had no idea a high school graduate could be this incompetent. It was my boss, Tom, who said this with a sarcastic smile. Tom is 5 years younger than me, but he's an elite who graduated from the top university in US and rose through the ranks faster than I did. As a high school graduate, it was tough for me to get promoted, and I was never the type to aggressively seek promotions, so I remain a regular employee. I found more fulfillment in quietly handling the tasks that everyone else disliked. Aren't you embarrassed to be ridiculed by someone younger than you? Well, I guess someone with just a high school diploma wouldn't have any pride. How do you manage to come to work every day in a company full of college graduates without any shame? Tom laughed obnoxiously as he said this. I endured daily mockery and insults from Tom, but I never talked back. It was true that I only had a high school diploma, and he was my boss. I believed that as a businessman, no matter how unreasonable it was, I had to silently follow the orders from senior. So, I always bit my tongue and endured. One day, the manager called Tom with an extremely angry look. Hey Tom, what is this? Making such a basic mistake. Do your job properly. When the manager shouted this, Tom immediately said, Manager, I wasn't in charge of that document. I had a sudden meeting yesterday and couldn't prepare it, so I asked Chris to do it. I couldn't believe my ears. I had no memory of Tom asking me to prepare any documents. Sorry. I looked up in surprise, only to see the manager glaring at me like a demon. At that moment, I didn't miss Tom's brief smirk. Tom, Chris, come with me. Yes, what is it? I timidly followed the manager. In contrast to my gloomy mood, Tom next to me looked completely at ease. What's going on? Making such a mistake. You're completely useless. This is why high school graduates. Even the manager said the same thing as Tom. I was well aware that, in this company full of college graduates, everyone looked down on me, a high school graduate. Still, hearing it out loud really hurt. No, manager, I didn't make that document. I began to say, Manager, since that's the case, may I get back to work? Sure, go ahead. Chris, I'll leave it to you then. After that, I was scolded endlessly by the manager. Tom walked away as if nothing had happened. Following the manager's instructions, I had to redo the document. With a deep sigh, I turned to my computer, only for Tom to come over with a smirk, carrying a pile of documents. He dropped them on my desk with a thud. Chris, I need you to finish these by the end of the day. But I have to redo the document the manager asked for. It's going to be hard to finish all this today. Excuse me, who do you think you are, talking back to me? You can stay after work to finish it. But don't charge overtime. If you do, The manager will get mad at me. Got it. Without listening to my protest, Tom walked away. Left with no choice, I worked until the last train to finish the tasks he dumped on me. I rushed out of the office, hurrying towards the station. This is bad. If I don't hurry, I'll miss the last train. I started to jog, my legs feeling as heavy as lead. When I finally sat down on the train, I felt like I never wanted to get up again. That's how exhausted I was. When I got home, my wife Jennifer was waiting up for me. Welcome back. You must have had a hard time working late. You must be exhausted. The bath is ready. Thank you. You don't look well. Are you feeling okay? Are you sick? I'm fine, don't worry. I told Jennifer that, but in reality, I had lost my appetite recently and wasn't sleeping well at night. If I told her the truth, she would worry a lot. So I pretended to be fine. The next morning, I managed to get a little sleep, but I still felt completely drained. Even so, I had to go to work. Dragging my heavy body, I headed to the office. As soon as I arrived, Tom made a snide remark. Chris, you look miserable. It's bad enough you can't do your job, but seeing your face makes it worse. The young female employees nearby giggled. I ignored Tom and the women, focusing on my work. That day, I had to make a lot of copies and was wrestling with the copier. Suddenly, it jammed, displaying an error message. Oh no, just what I needed. As I opened the copier to fix it, Tom walked over. What are you doing? Chris, can't you even make copies? Even middle schoolers can handle that nowadays. Hey everyone, listen up. Chris can't even make copies. Tom laughed loudly, announcing to the entire office. Laughter echoed from all corners of the floor. I was filled with shame and frustration. Why do I have to go through this? What did I ever do to deserve this? I muttered this to myself, clenching my teeth as I continued to fix the copier. After that, I don't remember much. By the time I realized it, I had finished work and was home. That night, as I lay in bed, thinking about work the next day, I felt depressed. I didn't want to go to work anymore. I didn't want to do anything. I just wanted to stay in bed forever. I wished morning would never come. I closed my eyes, praying for that. The next morning, while drinking coffee at breakfast, Jennifer said, "You're not yourself. You barely ate dinner last night or breakfast this morning. You've been losing weight. Let's go to the hospital soon, please." I'm fine. Even as I said that, I felt something was wrong with me lately. As I left the house to go to work as usual, I suddenly felt dizzy and stumbled. I didn't fall, but Jennifer rushed over, begging me to take the day off. I finally agreed. We decided to go to the hospital just in case. The diagnosis was depression. The doctor told me to take a break from work for a while. Chris, you're under a lot of stress right now. Your mind and body are exhausted. You need some rest. Yes. Although the diagnosis was unexpected, I quickly understood. Working in that environment every day had finally broken my spirit. On the way home from the hospital, my wife said, "Hey, Chris, instead of just taking a break, why don't you quit the company? My parents run a farm in the countryside, but they're getting old and thinking about selling the land. They've been working those fields for decades and don't want to hand them over to strangers. But I'm a sole child and can't take over. So, how about we run the farm together? I know farming is hard, but I don't think city life suits you. Why not try living a peaceful life in the countryside?" I was surprised by her sudden suggestion, but I remembered the peaceful scenery of her parents' place and thought it might not be a bad idea. Indeed, the corporate ladder and city life might not suit me. This could be a good opportunity. Thinking that, I decided to take Jennifer's proposal. Even though it seemed reckless, I felt a certain confidence that we could make it together. The next day, I went to submit my resignation. Even at this point, Tom continued to mock me. "Chris, you're like typical loser. He laughed as he said that. But Tom's words no longer reached my ears. My heart had already started moving towards a new life. Tom, thank you for everything. Working with you has been a valuable experience. Thank you. I smiled and greeted to Tom. He looked shocked and started to say Chris, but seemed at a loss for words. I left the company without saying anything more. Thus began our life in farming. Every day, dressed in work clothes and covered in mud, we tend to the fields. There is no rest for a farmer. Yet, I feel much more satisfied than I ever did as a businessman. It's a satisfying kind of fatigue. A while after moving to the countryside, I found myself completely healthy, both mentally and physically. It's all thanks to Jennifer's suggestion back then that I am who I am now. I have nothing but gratitude for Jennifer, who has always supported me. 10 years after moving, our life has stabilized, and I decided it was time to buy a new car for personal use. Aside from the farm truck, I wanted to treat Jennifer to a car with the best comfort possible. I had already done some preliminary checks and thought today might be a good time for a test drive if things aligned. Excited, I headed to the city dealer. As I arrived at the dealership and was about to enter, a salesman came out to greet me. "Welcome, sir," he said politely, but immediately changed to a puzzled look upon seeing me. He looked me up and down, scrutinizing my appearance. For a moment, I was confused by his change in demeanor, but then I remembered I had come straight from the fields in my work clothes. I didn't have time to change cloths after farming today, and my clothes were splattered with mud. The previous times I came to check out cars, the salesperson who assisted me understood my situation, but it seemed he wasn't there today. As I was thinking about this, the next moment, both the salesman and I realized something at the same time. It was a face I never wanted to see again. The face of the man who wrecked my mind and body. Bitter memories I wanted to forget resurfaced. It was Tom, the man who tormented me during my days as a businessman. He drove me to the brink, causing my mental breakdown. I never thought I'd see him again, let alone here. "Chris, what are you doing in a place like this?" "Tom, what are you doing here?" After all that, I was scouted for my skills and brought to this company. I'm now their top salesperson. And you, Chris, what's with those filthy clothes? I heard rumors you became a farmer. That's a perfect job for a lowly high school grad like you. What are you doing in a luxury car dealership? I'm here to buy a car. What? Don't be ridiculous. Do you even know how much these cars cost? Tom laughed loudly. This shop wasn't doing well, so they called me top salesperson to help. I've got a huge responsibility to boost sales. They rely on me a lot, but for someone like me, it's a piece of cake. Even without being asked, Tom went on and on about himself. Then he looked me up and down again, snorting in disdain. A poor guy in work clothes like you could never afford a car here. Get out of here. Yeah, but even if you say that, I plan to buy a car from here. When I said that again, Tom replied, Sorry, sir. All the cars just sold out. He waved his hand dismissively, shooing me away. At that moment, I felt something snap inside me. I had tolerated everything he said before, but now he wasn't my boss. I was his customer. Oh, really? I see. So that's how you treat customers. Well then, please cancel the order for the 20 cars I reserved here. Too bad, Tom. You missed a great chance to boost your sales. What? What are you talking about? I don't understand. Tom looked confused. I think you'll understand by tomorrow. Well, I'll be going now. Goodbye. Without waiting for him to shoo me away, I headed for the exit. I could feel Tom standing there, stunned. As soon as I left the dealership, I took out my phone and called someone. The next morning, the doorbell rang. When I opened the door, there stood the branch manager of the car manufacturer and Tom. Mr. Miller. We deeply apologize for yesterday due to Tom's mishandling. We caused you great discomfort, and we sincerely apologize." The branch manager apologized deeply. Beside him, Tom, his face pale, also apologized. "Mr. Miller, I'm truly sorry for my mistake. It's a nuisance to have them making a scene at my doorstep. I'm sorry, but you're disturbing me. Please leave. If you continue to make a fuss, I'll call the police." "But Mr. Miller, we just want to show our sincerity." "Sincerity or not, as I said yesterday, cancel all 20 reserved cars. I don't want to buy from a company with such poor customer service." Tom muttered in a small voice. "Excuse me, branch manager, I still don't fully understand the situation." "You fool, listen, Mr. Miller is—" The branch manager was about to shout again, which would be a real nuisance, so I decided to speak up to silence him. After starting the farm, things were stable for a while. But after my in-laws passed away, sales started to decline steadily, putting the farm's survival at risk. Jennifer and I discussed possible solutions. Simply selling our produce wasn't enough. So, I thought about how we could make use of the misshapen vegetables that were perfectly edible but not sellable. We started processing them into vegetable juices and sweets, and also experimented with creative packaging without altering the vegetables themselves. Even though the vegetables grown on our family farm didn't look great, they tasted excellent. Initially, this was just to boost sales and recycle vegetables, but city folks found it eco-friendly and trendy. A popular model featured our vegetables on social media, and suddenly our popularity soared. High-end supermarkets in the city quickly reached out, wanting to stock our products, so we increased production. Orders grew rapidly, and we soon couldn't keep up just by supplying supermarkets, so we opened our own store. As customer demand surged, one store wasn't enough, so we opened multiple branches. Now, we also sell online, and sales are booming. In the past few years, our annual income has exceeded $1 million. While I now function more as a business owner than a farmer, I still focus on the farming itself, leaving the business operations to others. Opening several stores was chaotic, and I owe a lot to the staff who helped manage the situation. Their efforts are why we are successful today. To show my gratitude, I plan to give special bonuses in the form of cars to the team members who worked hard during our store openings. And since I wanted to buy a nice car for Jennifer as well. But after Tom's behavior, I'm no longer interested in purchasing. No way. A high school grad and farmer making over $1 million a year. Tom, already pale, looked even more shocked and frozen. We've been featured on TV and in magazines several times. Didn't you know? Well, Tom, you've always looked down on farming, so I guess you wouldn't be interested. As Tom mentioned, the dealership sales were poor, and its survival was in question. Canceling my order for 20 cars would ruin their chance to boost sales. The branch manager desperately wanted me to retract the cancellation. Tom, you understand the situation now. Show your deep apologies to Mr. Miller. I'm truly sorry. Tom is hurriedly and repeatedly apologizing. For someone who mocked and scorned me during my businessman days, this must be the ultimate humiliation. Tom, you can't take back what you said. You judged me by my appearance, education, and job, didn't you? I don't want to buy gifts for my valuable employees from a company that employs such shallow people. Even if you apologize, my decision to cancel the purchase remains unchanged. Then the branch manager said something shocking. If I fire him, will you reconsider your purchase, Mr. Miller? Wait, please, branch manager, that's too much. With poor sales performance and now causing this mess, it's better for everyone if someone like you is gone. What about me? You can't just fire me. That's unfair. I'll sue you. Tom panicked at the branch manager's sudden words. However, the branch manager wasn't fazed by Tom's threat to sue. What are you talking about? Losing a valuable customer is a far greater loss for the company. Do as you wish. Not wanting to create more of a scene at my doorstep, I asked them to leave for the day. We agreed that the branch manager and I would discuss things further on another day. A few days later, the branch manager came to my house again, bringing a box of sweets. "Mr. Miller, Tom has been terminated." He said this right at the start. According to the branch manager, when they began investigating Tom for termination, they discovered that he had been involved in a sexual harassment incident at his previous company and had resigned to take responsibility. He had told me he was headhunted, but that was a lie. He also claimed to be the top salesperson, carrying the company's reputation, which was another lie. It seemed he wanted to impress me as much as possible. When the sexual harassment issue arose, the woman involved was about to sue him, but he managed to settle it with compensation. So, when Tom threatened to sue the branch manager the other day, it was likely an empty threat, as he probably didn't have the financial means to do so anymore. Furthermore, due to this incident, his wife divorced him, and his family disowned him. Mr. Miller, I deeply apologize once again for the rudeness you experienced. Tom has been terminated, so please, could you reconsider your decision? I liked the car I planned to purchase, and I could see the branch manager's sincerity. With Tom gone, I decided to go ahead and buy the 20 cars as planned. After being fired, Tom struggled to find a new job. His pride made it difficult, as he kept seeking positions that matched his inflated self-image. One day, he came to my house, apologizing, and said, "Chris, please, I beg you. Can't you help me get my old job back? You're my only hope." "Tom, you're a college graduate and a capable person, right? You should be able to solve this yourself. As you said, I'm just a lowly high school graduate farmer. I can't help you." I dismissed him coldly. For a while, I had blamed Tom for everything, thinking that if it weren't for him, I wouldn't have had to leave my job and suffer so much. I had hated him for driving me to a mental breakdown and forcing me to leave a company I had worked at for years. But now, I no longer felt any hatred towards him. Instead, I felt pity for him. He was a shallow person who judged others solely based on appearance and education. Tom came to me several more times, pleading for help. "Enough is enough. You're disturbing me. If you come again, I'll call the police." After that, Tom never came to my house again. Tom ended up unable to hold a steady job, ran out of money, and is now living almost like a homeless person. One day, while doing day labor, he apparently dropped the lumber he was carrying. "Hey, what are you doing? You're completely useless. Don't mess with me, you low-educated guy. Don't you dare talk down to a college graduate like me." "What? A college grad? So what? Education means nothing here. You can't even carry a light piece of lumber properly. Are you even a man? Besides studying, what can you do? Well, good luck." Tom was laughed at by the other workers. What goes around comes around. Tom's scorn and mockery towards others have come back to haunt him. As for me, the employees were thrilled with the cars I purchased for them. Jennifer was also delighted with the car we bought for personal use. Seeing everyone so happy made me feel truly rewarded. It felt like all the hard work and effort had finally paid off. Seeing others smile makes me happier than anything else. It's the first time I've ridden in such a comfortable car. Jennifer said excitedly. "Jennifer, thank you so much for everything. Let's go for a drive soon and have some good food." Jennifer smiled and said, "Yes, let's." Business is going well. Sales are steadily increasing. Next, we're brainstorming with all the employees to develop products that even kids who dislike vegetables will enjoy. I never dreamed that I would live such fulfilling days. Feeling a sense of purpose in my work every day during my time as a businessman, I finally achieved a satisfying life. This success is thanks to the support of those around me. It's not something I accomplished alone. As a farmer, I am dedicated to growing delicious vegetables. But I also want my employees to enjoy their work, drawing from my tough experiences as a businessman. I want to continue creating vegetables and a company that makes both the workers and consumers smile.
This story is titled, My Parents Pretended I Didn't Exist, so I made sure everyone forgot about them. Hey everyone, I've been holding this in for a long time, but I guess I finally need to let it out. I'm Lila, 24 female, and the youngest in a family of 5. Honestly though, I might as well have been a guest in my own house, because I always felt like I didn't belong. My parents made it pretty clear who their favorites were, and it wasn't me. My older brothers, Ethan and Nathan, got all the love and attention growing up. Ethan, the oldest, was basically their pride and joy. He was smart, charming, and the one they bragged about at every family gathering. Ethan's taking this amazing internship. You get the picture. Nathan, on the other hand, was the golden boy in a different way. He was the sporty one, the life of the party, the guy everyone liked. He had trophies lining the shelves in his room, and my parents loved showing them off to anyone who walked through the door. And me? I was just Lila, the quiet kid in the corner, the "oh, you're here too" child. It wasn't like they were mean to me, they just didn't care enough to notice I existed half the time. I first started to realize how different things were when I was about 9. I have a core memory where one day school let out early because of a storm. Everyone else had their parents rushing to pick them up. I waited and waited, clutching my bag, staring out the window as one by one, the kids left. I was the last one there. The janitor came over eventually and asked if my parents were on their way. I remember saying, they must be stuck in traffic. I waited another hour, and when it started to get dark, I gave up. I walked home, soaked to the bone, because I didn't even have an umbrella. By the time I got there, my shoes were squishing with every step. When I opened the door, my mom was sitting on the couch, flipping through a magazine. She didn't even look at me. "Oh, you're back. Dinner's in the fridge." That was it. No. "Why are you soaked?" Or, "I'm sorry we forgot you." Nothing. It wasn't just one bad day, though. Stuff like that happened all the time. My parents forgot to pick me up from school so often that my teacher started offering to drive me home. She'd ask, "Do you want me to call them?" I always said no because honestly, what was the point? Birthdays weren't much better. My mom would throw these parties, but they weren't for me. She'd invite her friends and their kids, not mine. I remember one year I overheard her talking to a friend on the phone. She said, "Lila doesn't really have friends anyway." I was standing in the hallway, and it hit me so hard that I went back to my room and stayed there until the party was over. Ethan and Nathan weren't much better. Ethan loved teasing me about everything. If I brought home a good grade, he'd laugh and say, "What do you want, a medal?" Nathan was the cool one, so he barely acknowledged me unless it was to roll his eyes or tell me to stop being so annoying. The worst part was that everyone outside the family thought we were perfect. My aunts would gush about how lucky I was to have such a supportive, rich family. Lucky? Are you kidding me? By the time I got to middle school, I thought that if I wanted attention from my parents, I'd have to do something big. So I joined clubs, started working harder on my grades, and signed up for every after-school activity I could. I thought maybe, just maybe, if I excelled at something, they'd notice me. It worked, sort of. They'd say stuff like, "Good job," but it was always in passing, like they were checking it off a list. Meanwhile, Ethan was going on about his plans for college, and Nathan was racking up more trophies. Compared to them, I felt like an afterthought. One year, I made the honor roll, and the school sent home a certificate. I was so proud of it that I taped it to the fridge, thinking my parents would see it and say something. The next day, it was gone. My mom had replaced it with one of Nathan's soccer schedules. Even when I tried to confront them about it, it was like talking to a wall. I remember asking my dad why they never came to my school events. He said, "We're busy, Lila. You know that." "Busy doing what? You went to Ethan's debate last week," I fired back. He just shrugged. "Ethan's competitions are a big deal. Besides, we can't be everywhere at once." I didn't even bother responding. By the time high school rolled around, I had pretty much given up on trying to compete for their attention. Instead, I focused on building something for myself. I threw everything into academics and worked my ass off, but this time to impress only myself. It paid off. I became valedictorian of my class. I thought maybe finally, this would be the thing that made them proud. I sent out invitations to the graduation ceremony, making sure they had all the details. I even reminded them the week before. The day of my speech, I stood at the podium and scanned the crowd, looking for their faces. Their seats were empty. Afterward, I found out they had gone to one of Nathan's basketball games instead. It wasn't even a championship or anything, just some regular game. I remember sitting in my car after graduation, holding my diploma, and feeling completely numb. It didn't matter what I did. They were never going to see me. That moment stuck with me. It was the first time I truly realized I was on my own. I knew I couldn't rely on them for anything. Not their support, not their approval, nothing. I think that was when I started planning my escape. College was my ticket out, and I wasn't going to waste it. When I started applying for colleges, I knew one thing. I was getting as far away from home as possible. There wasn't some big emotional goodbye when I left either. My parents barely acknowledged it. Ethan had gone to a prestigious university a few years earlier, and Nathan was already being scouted for college sports. Me going to school? Just another event on the calendar. I got into a decent school on a full scholarship, which was the only way it was happening since I knew they wouldn't help me financially. And they didn't. Ethan got a brand new car when he graduated, and my parents made sure Nathan's dorm was fully paid for. Meanwhile, I got a congrats text and nothing else. At first, college was overwhelming. I was juggling classes, working part-time, and trying to figure out how to live on my own. But honestly, it felt freeing. No one was there to dismiss me or make me feel like an afterthought. For the first time, I started to realize I could build a life without them. It wasn't all smooth sailing, though. In those first few months, I'd get random texts from my mom, usually something passive-aggressive like, "Haven't heard from you in a while? Too busy for your family?" Once, she even left me a voicemail saying she missed me, but the tone made it clear she wasn't actually sad. I think she just liked the idea of me feeling guilty. I didn't bother replying most of the time. One time, she asked if I was coming home for the holidays. I told her I couldn't afford the trip since I was paying for everything myself. Her response? "Well, if you managed your money better, you wouldn't have that problem." I nearly laughed out loud, as if I wasn't already scraping by with 2 part-time jobs and student loans. As the semesters went on, I started to find my footing. I got a job at a cafe near campus, and the owner was kind enough to treat me like a human being, which was more than I could say for my own parents. It was nice having someone ask, "How are you doing?" and actually mean it. Even as I was figuring myself out, the cracks in my family kept getting bigger. Every so often, I'd check my brother's social media, and it was like looking at a completely different world. Ethan was thriving in his high-paying internship, constantly posting pictures of fancy dinners and vacations my parents were probably footing the bill for. Nathan was killing it in his sports career, with endless posts from games my parents were front and center for. There were no mentions of me, of course. No, proud of Lila for doing her thing at college, or, look at my daughter working so hard. It was like I didn't exist. One day, a coworker at the cafe asked me about my family. I didn't know what to say. "Oh, they're busy with my brothers," I said, brushing it off. But inside, I felt this familiar pang of anger. Why was it so easy for them to ignore me? Things came to a head during the holidays. My parents kept pushing for me to come home for Christmas, and I finally gave in, thinking it might not be so bad. Big mistake. The second I walked in the door, it was clear I was a visitor, not family. My mom made a big deal about Ethan's new job and Nathan's latest game highlights. No one even asked how I was doing. At one point during dinner, Ethan smirked and said, "Wait, what are you even studying again?" I glared at him. "Business. Like I've told you 100 times." "Oh, right. Business," he said, dragging out the word like it was some joke. Then he turned to Nathan. "So, what's the deal with your next game?" I sat there, barely resisting the urge to throw it across the room. My dad decided to pipe up, all smug. Ethan and Nathan are really making the family proud. I bit my tongue so hard I could taste blood, but inside I was boiling. After dinner, my mom cornered me in the kitchen. "You've been really quiet, Lila. Is there something wrong?" I stared at her. "Yeah, I'm great," I said, dripping with sarcasm. "Well, you sure don't seem great," she snapped back. "Maybe if you actually visited once in a while, you wouldn't feel so left out." That was it. I exploded. "Oh, I feel left out, because you've never given a crap about including me. Don't act like this is on me." Her face twisted. "That's not true, Lila, and you know it. Stop being so dramatic." "Dramatic?" I shot back. "You've ignored me my whole life. Don't stand there and act like it's my fault I don't want to be around you." I just shook my head and walked away. What was the point? The breaking point came later that night when I was in the kitchen getting some water when I heard voices outside. My dad was talking to the neighbor over the fence. Normally, I'd tune out their boring small talk, but then I heard my dad say something that stopped me in my tracks. "Yeah, we've got 2 kids. Ethan and Nathan keep us plenty busy." 2 kids, not 3. At first, I thought I'd misheard. I stepped closer to the door, heart pounding. My mom laughed and added, "Lila's off doing her own thing, I guess. She's not around much anymore." By this point, I realized they weren't just ignoring me. They'd erased me. I felt a wave of anger rush through me. Before I could even think it through, I yanked the door open and stepped outside. My dad and the neighbor looked up, startled. "2 kids, huh?" I said, my voice shaking. "Guess I don't count anymore." My dad blinked, clearly caught off guard. "Lila, it's not what you think. Don't, I cut him off. I heard you. You don't even acknowledge me as your kid. What kind of parent does that? The neighbor awkwardly mumbled something about needing to head home and scurried away. My dad turned to me, his face hardening. Lila, you're being dramatic. You're always off doing your own thing, so what do you expect us to say? What do I expect? I was shaking from anger. I expect you to remember I exist. I expect you to care, even just a little, about my life. But I guess that's asking too much, huh? My mom sighed. Like I was the one being unreasonable. Lila, you're overreacting. You're so sensitive about these things. I laughed bitterly. Sensitive? You've ignored me my whole life, and now you're pretending I don't exist, and I'm the sensitive one? Lila, stop this, my dad said. You're being ridiculous. We've always supported you. Supported me how exactly? You didn't even pay for my college. You show up for every one of Nathan's games, brag about Ethan's job to everyone. But what have you done for me? Name one thing. Neither of them said a word. They just stood there, looking at me like I was the problem. But I was done. Completely, utterly done. You know what? I said, stepping back toward the door. Forget it. You don't have to pretend anymore. You've made it pretty clear where I stand. I'm leaving, and don't bother calling me, because I'm not coming back. My mom rolled her eyes and said, Oh, come on, Lila. Stop making a big deal out of everything. I didn't even reply. I went inside, grabbed my things, and walked out. That night, I drove back to my apartment in silence, replaying the whole thing in my head. Part of me felt a twinge of guilt, wondering if I'd overreacted. But then I reminded myself of everything that led to this point. The years of neglect, the empty seats at my graduation, the complete lack of care. This wasn't me overreacting. This was me finally standing up for myself. When I got back to my apartment, I sat on my bed for a long time, staring at my phone. There were a couple of missed calls from my mom, but no voicemails, no texts, not even an attempt to apologize. That was the moment I knew it wasn't just about leaving physically. I had to cut them out of my life completely. I unfriended them on every social media platform and updated my emergency contacts. If they didn't want me in their lives, I'd make sure they weren't in mine either. But even that didn't feel like enough. After everything they'd done, I needed people to know the truth. So I did something I never thought I'd do. I went on Reddit. I wrote a post detailing everything, the years of being ignored, the missed events, and that final confrontation. I laid it all out, raw and unfiltered. I didn't name names, but I included enough details for people to understand just how bad it was. I didn't think much of what would happen next. I was just venting, getting everything off my chest. But by the next morning, the post had blown up. Hundreds of comments, thousands of upvotes, and messages flooding in from strangers telling me they'd been through similar stuff. Some people were horrified by my parents' behavior. Others shared their own stories of being overlooked or ignored by their families. I didn't feel like I was the problem. It was validating in a way I can't even describe. I wasn't invisible anymore, not to strangers at least. The attention gave me a weird sense of confidence. I decided I wasn't going to just sit in silence and let my parents sweep this under the rug like they did with everything else. If they wanted to pretend I didn't exist, I'd make sure the whole world knew exactly who they were. I decided to dig up the receipts. I went through old emails, texts, and even pictures. I found a photo from my high school graduation with the glaringly empty seats where my parents were supposed to be. I found a text my mom had sent me after I got accepted to college that just said, "Good for you. Let us know if you need anything," which was laughable because they didn't lift a finger to help. I posted an update to my Reddit thread with all of it, screenshots, photos, and more details about what happened that night I left. The post exploded even more. People were furious on my behalf, calling my parents out as textbook narcissists and praising me for cutting ties. The support was overwhelming. Strangers were telling me I'd done the right thing, that I was brave for walking away. Some even said my post had inspired them to finally stand up to their own toxic families. Then suddenly my parents found out, and they didn't stay silent. Hell no, they went straight into attack mode. My mom was the first to pounce. She left this voicemail, her voice fake sweet, but absolutely seething underneath. Lila, we need to talk. This post you wrote is causing serious issues, and I just can't believe you'd air family problems like that. Call me back. I deleted it. Out of nowhere, Ethan decided to chime in with an email that made my blood boil. You're humiliating the family, he wrote, like he was lecturing me from a podium. This is immature and you're blowing everything out of proportion. Take the post down and apologize to mom and dad. Apologize? For what? I didn't even bother wasting my time replying. And just when I thought it couldn't get worse, Nathan shot off a text. What are you doing? This is making everything harder for everyone. Just stop already. Harder for everyone? Are you kidding me? After years of being ignored and dismissed, they had the audacity to tell me to let it go? Absolutely not. If they wanted silence, they were barking up the wrong tree. It wasn't just within the family. Word spread to their friends, and apparently, people started asking uncomfortable questions. A mutual acquaintance told me my mom had tried to downplay the post, saying it was just a misunderstanding and that I was going through a phase. But not everyone bought it. Some of their friends started distancing themselves. My parents' perfect family image was starting to crack, and they were scrambling to fix it. My mom, being my mom, went straight to Facebook. She posted this long, dramatic message about how heartbroken she was that her youngest had turned against the family. Classic victim mode. She wrote stuff like, "We always did our best for Lila, and it's devastating that she would do this to us." The comments? A total mixed bag. Some people blindly rallied behind her with nonsense like, "You're such a good mom. She'll come around." But others, they weren't buying her act. Someone straight up called her out. "Why doesn't Lila visit anymore? There must be a reason." I couldn't stop laughing when I saw it. It was like this little spark of satisfaction seeing everything blow up. Sure, the attention wasn't exactly flattering, but for once it was all on me, and not on Ethan's awards or Nathan's games. That made me laugh even harder. Watching people finally hold them accountable was just the cherry on top. But my parents weren't done. A few days later, I got a message from an aunt, one of the few relatives I'd ever been close to. She said she'd heard about the post and wanted to talk. I figured she'd be on my side. But nope. When I answered the phone, she started in with, "Lila, I don't understand why you're doing this. Your parents aren't perfect, but they love you." I cut her off. If they loved me, they wouldn't have treated me like I didn't exist for years. And they definitely wouldn't have told the neighbor they only have 2 kids. She portrayed it like I was the one being difficult. Families fight, Lila, but you don't air your dirty laundry in public. This isn't how you solve things. I told her, it's not about solving things. It's about finally telling the truth. If they didn't want this out there, maybe they should have acted like parents instead of pretending I didn't matter. She didn't have much to say after that. The messages kept coming. Cousins, aunts, even a family friend who I hadn't spoken to in years. Everyone had an opinion, and most of them boiled down to, "You're being too harsh." But the thing is, I wasn't being harsh. I was being honest. At some point, I realized I didn't have to keep defending myself to these people. They weren't there when my parents skipped my graduation. They didn't see me sitting in the rain, waiting for a ride that never came. They didn't live through years of being ignored while my brothers were showered with love and attention. So I stopped responding. Instead, I threw myself into building my life without them. I started spending more time with my friends, who were nothing but supportive. Mara, my best friend, even joked, "You should just adopt us as your family. We're way better anyway." She wasn't wrong. Around this time, I started making bigger moves. I legally changed my last name, updated all my records, and even changed my emergency contacts. I didn't want them tied to me in any way, not even on paper. It was freeing in a way I can't explain. At that point, they finally went silent. So I thought the dust had settled. Turns out that was just the calm before the storm. My parents didn't just sit back and let things slide. They went straight into full-blown damage control. Not to fix anything with me, of course. This wasn't about repairing relationships. It was about saving face. And boy, were they scrambling. They weren't just scrambling to save their reputation. They were actively trying to destroy mine. A mutual acquaintance sent me screenshots of a post my mom had made in one of her Facebook groups. She claimed I was unstable and making up lies because I was jealous of Ethan and Nathan. She went on about how she and my dad had done everything for me, but I was ungrateful and determined to hurt the family. The kicker. She ended it with, "It's heartbreaking to see your own child turn against you for no reason," complete with a sad emoji and a Bible quote about forgiveness. The comments made my blood boil. Her church friends chimed in with, "You're such a good mother and Lila will come around eventually." One even added, "Some kids don't realize how lucky they are until it's too late." Lucky? Seriously? But the worst part was seeing my relatives join in. A cousin I hadn't heard from in years commented, "I always thought Lila was a little dramatic." Another relative messaged me directly saying, "You're being unfair to your parents. They've always been so kind to us. Are you sure this isn't just a misunderstanding?" Misunderstanding? That word sat with me for days. How do you misunderstand a lifetime of being ignored? How do you misinterpret being erased from your own family? I left them on red because I didn't trust myself to respond without saying something I'd regret. People in my hometown started connecting dots from my Reddit post, even though I never mentioned names. Suddenly, I was hearing from old neighbors, mutual acquaintances, and even relatives I hadn't spoken to in years. One message came from a former neighbor saying something like, "I always thought your parents were a little too focused on your brothers, but I never realized it was this bad. I'm so sorry you had to go through that." Part of me wanted to say, Where was this energy when I was a kid? But instead, I left it on red. Then came the relatives. Some sent apologies that felt more like them clearing their conscience than actually owning up to anything. Others weren't so kind. One messaged me about how I was tearing the family apart and needed to make things right. That one stung more than I expected, even though I deleted it without replying. As much as I didn't want to care, it hurt to lose some of my extended family. A cousin I'd been close to growing up sent me a long text saying, "I just don't know if I can be in the middle of this, Lila. I'm sorry, but I think it's best if we don't talk for a while." For a second, I wanted to argue with her, to explain everything she didn't know about my parents. But what was the point? If she couldn't see the truth after everything I'd shared, she probably never would. That realization was hurtful. Cutting ties with my parents didn't just mean losing them. It meant losing anyone who chose to stay on their side. I thought I was prepared for it. But feeling the cracks grow in relationships I thought I could count on made me question if I'd gone too far. But the real hit came when my parents escalated things. Out of nowhere, I got a letter from a lawyer, an actual cease and desist. They accused me of defamation, claimed my post was damaging their reputation, and demanded I take it down immediately. I sat there, staring at the letter, feeling like the air had been sucked out of the room. I'd thought I was just sharing my story, my truth. I hadn't expected it to blow up like this, let alone turn into a legal mess. I called a lawyer of my own, who assured me I was protected under free speech. Still, the stress was overwhelming. The legal threat wasn't even the worst part. The worst part was how fast the story was spreading. Mutual acquaintances started messaging me, asking what was going on. Some were nosy, others were outright judgmental. Even at work, people were whispering. One coworker approached me and said, "Hey, I saw this post about a family drama. It sounds familiar." I brushed it off, but inside I was panicking. My professional life was supposed to be my safe space, and now it felt like that was slipping away too. Meanwhile, my parents' social circle was unraveling. People were asking them uncomfortable questions like, "Why didn't you go to Lila's graduation?" Or, "Why does she feel so distant from you?" They didn't have answers. And from what I heard, some of their closest friends were starting to pull away. But instead of reflecting on their actions, they doubled down. It wasn't just my family trying to drag me down. Somehow, word had gotten to my workplace. A coworker casually mentioned over lunch, "So, I heard you've been dealing with some family drama. That Reddit post was a lot." My stomach dropped. "How did you even find that?" I asked, trying to sound unfazed. She shrugged. "Someone shared it in a group chat. Honestly, some people think it's a little intense. But hey, you do you." For the rest of the day, I couldn't stop wondering how many people at work were whispering about it. Every time I caught someone glancing at me in the break room, I wondered if they thought I was the unstable daughter my mom was painting me as. What had felt empowering at first was now starting to feel like a grenade I'd pulled the pin on without thinking. Then Ethan, of course, sent another email. Shorter this time, but just as infuriating. "You're humiliating us. Take the post down before you make things worse." And Nathan, ever the peacemaker, tried a softer approach with a text. "Can we talk? This is getting out of hand." I didn't reply to either of them. They weren't reaching out because they cared. They were reaching out to protect their own image. But honestly, I started questioning if I'd done the right thing. The post had felt empowering at first, like I was finally taking control of my story. But now? Now it felt like everything was spinning out of control. I wasn't just exposing the truth, I was caught in the fallout. My parents had always been masters at controlling the narrative, and even though I'd flipped the script, they were fighting tooth and nail to regain that control. My friends tried to reassure me. Mara pulled me aside one day and said, "You don't have to go through this alone. We've got your back." And while I believed her, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was dragging everyone into my mess. I thought about deleting the post just to make everything stop, but would that even work? Would it undo the damage or just make me look like I'd caved under pressure? The weight of it all was crushing, and for the first time in a long time, I felt stuck. I don't know what my next move is. Part of me wants to keep fighting, but another part of me wonders if it's worth it. Right now, I'm just trying to figure out how to breathe again. Maybe I'll have an update soon, but for now, I'm just stuck in the middle of this mess, trying to figure out what the hell to do next. Final update. Hey everyone, here's the update you've been waiting for. All right, here's what went down. After weeks of feeling stuck and overwhelmed, I realized something. I was letting them win. My parents had been controlling the narrative my whole life, and here I was, letting them do it again. That lawyer letter, the judgmental messages, the whispers at work, it was all just noise. And honestly, I was done with it. I sat down with my lawyer again, mostly to calm my nerves. They told me what I needed to hear. I wasn't in the wrong. The post was anonymous, factual, And there wasn't a single thing my parents could actually use against me. Once I let that sink in, it was like I could finally breathe again. That's when I knew I needed to reclaim the story. I went back to Reddit and wrote an update. This time, I didn't hold back. I laid everything out. The lawyer's letter, the messages, the fallout with my extended family. And I didn't just talk about it, I showed proof. Screenshots of the texts, the cease and desist letter, with names blacked out, of course, and even a photo of those empty seats at my graduation. I wasn't just telling my side anymore, I was showing it. And wow, the response was something else. The comments flooded in, thousands of them. People weren't just supporting me, they were tearing apart every excuse my parents had ever tried to make. Classic emotional manipulation. This is exactly why we need to call out toxic family dynamics. It felt so good to see strangers validating everything I'd been feeling for years. Even Ethan went quiet after that. I think he realized his usual smug, condescending emails weren't going to work anymore. Nathan sent another text. Do you really want to cut ties forever? But honestly, I didn't even bother replying. If they're not willing to own up to what they've done, what's the point? At work, things actually turned out better than I expected. One coworker who'd hinted at the post before brought it up again but said, I saw your update. That took guts. I'm sorry you had to deal with that. No judgment, no awkwardness, just support. So, yeah, it was messy, but I feel like I finally got my footing again. My parents' attempts to control the narrative backfired, and for the first time, I'm not the one sitting in silence while they spin their lies. I've been focusing on the people who actually matter, the ones who show up for me, not just when it's convenient for them. The holidays are coming up, and this year I'm hosting a little dinner with my friends. No forced smiles, no fake conversations, just people who care about me for me. They tried to take me down, but here I am, standing my ground. It's not perfect, and I'm sure there's more to come, but for now, I'm finally feeling like I'm in control of my own story, and that's a win I'll take. Thank you to everyone who supported me on this journey, whether it was through Reddit, a kind message, or just reading my story. It's been a wild ride, but I'm finally in a place where I feel happy, loved, and free. This is my life now, and it's only getting better from here.
My name is Maya Richardson, and I grew up watching my parents build their sports nutrition empire from the ground up. Some might think being born into a wealthy family meant a life of luxury and ease, but that couldn't be further from the truth. My parents, especially my father, made sure I understood the value of hard work from day one. I can still remember the first time Dad brought me to the office. I was 7, wearing my favorite blue dress with tiny flowers, trying to look as professional as a second grader could. Maya, he said, setting me up at a small desk near his office, one day, all of this might be yours. But you'll have to earn it, just like I did. Those words shaped my entire childhood. While other kids spent their summers by the pool, I was learning about inventory management and customer service. Mom sometimes worried I was missing out on being a kid, but I loved every minute of it. The company, Richardson Nutrition, became my second home. College flew by in a blur of business classes and internships at Dad's company. I worked in every department, starting from the warehouse up. No special treatment, that was our deal. The employees who'd known me since childhood watched with approval as I learned the ropes from the ground up. After graduation, I dove headfirst into my role at the company. My days were packed with meetings, reports, and strategy sessions. Dating? That was a foreign concept. My college roommate Sarah used to joke that I was married to my job. Everything changed at the company's annual holiday party. I was running late, as usual, having stayed behind to finish some quarterly reports. When I finally arrived at the venue, the party was in full swing. That's when I saw him, James Cooper, from our Denver branch. Tall, with warm brown eyes and an easy smile that made the exhaustion of my 14-hour workday melt away. You must be Maya, he said, extending his hand. I've heard so much about you. All good things, I hope? I laughed, accepting his handshake. The best. Though they didn't mention you were beautiful. That night, we talked for hours. About work, about family, about our dreams. He seemed to understand me in a way no one else had. When he asked for my number at the end of the night, my heart did a little flip. After James returned to Denver, we started messaging each other constantly. Every morning started with his "good morning, beautiful" text, and every night ended with long conversations about our days. It felt like I'd known him forever. One night, after a particularly long video call, I took a leap. "Why don't you transfer to the main office? We could be together, and it would be great for your career." There was a pause on his end. "Maya, I can't. My family's here in Denver. My parents, my sister, my nephew, we're really close. I couldn't leave them." My heart sank a little, but then he added, "But why don't you come here? The Denver branch could use someone with your expertise." I sat with that thought for a day before approaching Dad in his office. "Daddy, I need your advice. What would you think about me transferring to the Denver branch?" I watched his face carefully as I explained about James. To my surprise, Dad just smiled. "I've been wondering when you'd ask. James has a good reputation in the company, and the Denver branch could use strong leadership. If this is what you want, I'll make it happen." 2 weeks later, I was standing in James's apartment in Denver, surrounded by moving boxes. "Welcome home," he said, wrapping his arms around me. I felt like I was exactly where I should be. The first meeting with his family came sooner than I expected. They all lived together in a modest 2-story house, his parents, Tom and Linda, his sister Rachel, and her teenage son Kyle. I was nervous as we pulled up to their house. "Your family must have a mansion," Linda said the moment I walked in. "This must seem so simple to you." I felt my cheeks flush. "Oh no, not at all. We've always lived pretty normally. No mansions or private jets, just a regular house." "But surely with your family's wealth," Tom started. "I've worked for everything since I was a kid," I explained. "Dad believed in earning your way. I'm more comfortable with simple things, honestly." I caught the disappointed looks they exchanged, but tried to ignore them. Rachel, James's sister, just looked me up and down, eyeing my simple sweater and jeans. "If I had your money, I wouldn't be caught dead in anything but designer labels," she said with a smirk. I just shrugged, not knowing how to respond. James squeezed my hand under the table, but said nothing to defend me. 2 months later, James proposed during a walk in the park. It wasn't elaborate, just us, a simple ring, and a heartfelt question. I said yes immediately. When it came to wedding planning, we had our first real disagreement. James wanted something extravagant, a huge venue, hundreds of guests, all the trimmings. "Babe, we don't need all that," I argued. "Let's do something small and meaningful." He eventually gave in, though not happily. We had a modest ceremony with just immediate family present. But I couldn't help overhearing Linda during the reception, whispering to her sister, "I expected something much grander from someone with her background. All this, it's so plain." I pretended not to hear, but their words stung more than I wanted to admit. The ink had barely dried on our marriage certificate when the questions about housing started. We were having Sunday dinner at Tom and Linda's when they brought it up. It was a typical family gathering, Rachel texting on her phone, Kyle playing video games in the corner, and Tom watching sports on TV while we ate. "So, Maya," Linda said, passing the mashed potatoes, "have you talked to your father about buying you two a house? Something in the Cherry Creek area would be perfect. I was just looking at listings there yesterday. There's this beautiful 5-bedroom with a pool." I nearly choked on my water. "Actually, we're planning to save up and buy our own place." The silence that followed was deafening. Rachel's fork stopped midway to her mouth. Tom muted the TV and turned to stare at me. Linda's face froze in that artificial smile I was beginning to recognize all too well. They exchanged loaded glances that made me feel like I'd said something terribly wrong. "But surely your father wouldn't mind." Tom started, wiping his mouth with his napkin. "I mean, it's just natural for parents to help their children get started. Especially when they're so capable." I cut him off firmly but politely, sitting up straighter in my chair. "James and I want to do this on our own. We're both working, and we can save up. I believe in earning what you have." James reached for my hand under the table, his palm slightly sweaty. "I support Maya on this," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. Besides, my apartment is perfectly fine for now. I've been renting it for years, and it's in a great location. Linda's eyes lit up suddenly, like she'd just had a brilliant idea. She set down her wine glass with a little too much force. Well, if you're staying in the apartment, Maya should pay the rent. After all, she makes quite a bit more than you do, James. It's only fair. I watched as my husband nodded in agreement, a little too quickly for my comfort. That makes sense, he said, not meeting my eyes. It's $3,000 a month. The amount took me by surprise. Denver wasn't cheap, but that seemed high for our neighborhood. Still, I didn't want to create waves. The tension in the room was already thick enough to cut with a knife. Sure, that's fair, I said, trying to keep my voice light. So our routine was established. Every month, I'd give James $3,000, and he'd handle the rent payment. Sometimes I'd see him making the transfer on his phone, always quick to close the screen if I walked by. It went on like this for a while until one day, a thought occurred to me while I was reviewing our monthly expenses. Hey, I said one evening while we were having dinner in our kitchen, the sounds of the city drifting in through the open window, since I'm paying the rent now, maybe I should take over the lease? We could put it in my name. It would make sense for tax purposes. James's reaction was immediate and strange. He tensed up, nearly dropping his fork onto his half-eaten pasta. His face paled slightly. No, that wouldn't work, he said quickly, his voice higher than usual. I've been renting from Mr. Johnson for years. He trusts me. We don't want to mess with a good thing. Something about his reaction bothered me deeply. The way his eyes wouldn't quite meet mine, the slight tremor in his hands as he reached for his water glass. But I pushed the feeling aside, like I'd been doing with so many little things lately. Life in Denver had fallen into a routine. I was settling into my role at the branch office, managing my team, and having weekly video calls with Mom and Dad. On the surface, everything seemed perfect. But there was one issue that kept gnawing at me. It happened for the first time on a Tuesday. I came home from work early with a headache, only to find Linda and Rachel sitting on my couch, watching my TV, eating the expensive salmon I'd bought for James's birthday dinner. "Oh, Maya," Linda said, not even getting up. "We were just having a little snack." I stood there, keys still in hand, staring at them. They had their shoes up on my coffee table, magazines scattered everywhere, and my kitchen looked like a tornado had hit it. This became a regular occurrence. I'd come home to find them there, or worse, come home to evidence they'd been there, empty food containers, things moved around, my closet clearly rifled through. They had keys. Of course they had keys. One evening, I tried talking to James about it. "Honey, don't you think it's a bit strange that your mom and sister just come in whenever they want?" He barely looked up from his phone. "They're family, Maya. You're being dramatic, just calm down." But I couldn't calm down. Not when I found them going through my personal papers one afternoon, giggling over my diary from college that they'd discovered in a box I hadn't unpacked yet. "We need to talk," I said firmly, my hands shaking slightly. "This isn't okay. You can't just come into our home without asking. You can't go through our things." Linda's face crumpled instantly. Tears sprang to her eyes like someone had turned on a faucet. "How dare you," she wailed. "After everything we've done to welcome you into our family. I knew you were too good for us, with your fancy background." As if on cue, James walked in. He took in the scene, his mother sobbing, Rachel glaring at me, and me standing there in shock. "What did you do?" he demanded, rushing to his mother's side. "She's trying to keep us away from you," Linda cried into his shoulder. "She says we're not welcome here anymore." "That's not what I started," but James cut me off. "How could you treat them like this? They're my family." After they left, James turned on me. His face was hard in a way I'd never seen before. "You need to fix this," he said. "Buy them something nice, really nice, and apologize." The next day, I went shopping after work. I bought Linda a designer handbag she'd been hinting about. and Rachel a pair of expensive boots. My hands felt dirty as I wrapped them. When I delivered the gifts to their house, they accepted them with smug smiles. "We knew you'd come around," Linda said, not even looking at me as she examined the handbag. "These will do," Rachel added, trying on the boots. That night, James finally spoke to me again. "See, was that so hard?" he asked, kissing my cheek. But something had changed. Something I couldn't quite put my finger on yet. After the boundary incident, things got worse in ways I hadn't imagined possible. Linda and Rachel turned gift demanding into an art form. Every minor holiday became an occasion for expectations. "Maya, you know it's National Sisters' Day next week," Rachel would text. "I saw this beautiful Gucci bag. It's the anniversary of when I first held James as a baby," Linda would announce. "I think a spa weekend would be appropriate to mark the occasion." The requests were endless: Mother's Day, birthday, Christmas, Easter, Valentine's Day, Labor Day, Memorial Day, even Groundhog Day became an excuse. When I hesitated about buying Linda a $500 scarf for Arbor Day, she burst into tears during family dinner. "I guess some people just don't understand family loyalty," she sniffled, while Rachel patted her back. "Even after we've welcomed her so warmly." "Maya," James said later that night, "why do you have to be so difficult? They're your family now too." "But James, don't you think this is getting out of hand? Last week your mom wanted a designer watch because it was National Ice Cream Day." He just shrugged. "If you can afford it, why not help family?" As if the situation wasn't stressful enough, Kyle, Rachel's 15-year-old son, started showing up at our apartment more frequently. At first, I tried to be understanding. All teenagers go through difficult phases, right? But Kyle took teenage attitude to new heights. One evening, I spent hours making my grandmother's special lasagna recipe. Kyle took one bite and pushed the plate away. "This is garbage," he declared. "Mom says you probably can't cook because you grew up with servants doing everything for you." I gripped my fork tighter. "Kyle, that's not appropriate." "Whatever," he cut me off. "I need $60 for the movies with my friends." When I refused, he kicked the kitchen chair. "You're loaded. Stop being such a miser. Mom says you're just playing poor to feel superior." That night, I tried talking to James about Kyle's behavior. We were getting ready for bed, and I was hoping he'd finally see reason. "Honey, Kyle was really disrespectful today. Could you maybe talk to him?" James didn't even look up from his phone. "You need to handle it yourself. Think of it as practice. We'll have our own kids someday. You need to learn how to deal with these situations." The next day, Kyle showed up again, loudly demanding money for a new video game. When I said no, he sprawled across our couch, turned the TV volume up to maximum, and started making pointed comments about fake humble rich people. I looked at my husband, hoping for support, but he just walked out of the room, leaving me alone with his smirking nephew. In that moment, standing in my own living room while a teenager openly disrespected me, I felt more alone than I ever had before. 2 years. It's amazing how much can change in 2 years. Or maybe how much you can convince yourself that things will get better if you just try hard enough, be patient enough, give enough. "I'm going to visit Mom and Dad this weekend," I told James over breakfast one morning. "Want to come?" He barely glanced up from his phone. "Can't. Promised Mom and Dad I'd help them with some stuff around the house." The drive to my parents' house was peaceful. Mom made my favorite lasagna, Dad told his terrible dad jokes, and for a few hours, I felt like myself again. Like the Maya who used to know exactly who she was and what she wanted. But life has a way of shattering peace into a million pieces. When I opened the door to our apartment Sunday evening, the stench hit me first: stale beer and pizza, and something worse. Empty cans littered every surface. Cigarette butts floated in half-empty Solo cups. Pizza boxes made a greasy tower on my coffee table. And there, sprawled across my living room like they owned it, were Kyle and 5 other teenagers, passed out among the wreckage of what had clearly been one hell of a party. "Get up," I shouted, my voice shaking with rage. All of you, out. Now. The teenagers startled awake, scrambling to gather their things. All except Kyle, who stretched lazily and looked at me with that familiar smirk. Why should I leave? I live here now. I felt my blood pressure rising. Excuse me? Had a fight with Mom and Grandma, he said, reaching for a half-empty beer can. Decided this was better than their rules. Uncle James said I could crash here. We rent this apartment, we may have problems, I said through gritted teeth, give me your keys. Now. Kyle laughed. Actually laughed. Rent this apartment? That's funny. This is Uncle James's apartment. Has been since great-grandpa left it to him. The room started spinning. What are you talking about? The apartment. It's his. Always has been. Got it when great-grandpa died 5 years ago. Everyone knows that. I couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. 2 years of rent payments. Every time I'd suggested putting the lease in my name, every time he'd dodged the question, every time he'd quickly hidden his phone when making the rent transfer. It had all been a lie. I must have looked like I was about to collapse, because Kyle's whole demeanor changed. The cocky teenager disappeared, replaced by someone who looked almost sympathetic. Look, he said, awkwardly patting my shoulder, there's something else you should know. He pulled out his phone, fidgeting with it. I'd been recording some of their conversations. Started doing it when they were talking shit about me, but, well, they talk about you a lot too. James's laugh came through the speaker first. That laugh I used to love. It's perfect, he was saying. $3,000 a month, straight into my pocket. She doesn't even question it. My stomach churned as Kyle played recording after recording. Each one worse than the last. Keep talking about family loyalty, Rachel was saying. She'll cave every time. Got a new Prada bag out of her last week. Just make sure you get her pregnant soon, Linda's voice again. Once there's a baby, her daddy will have to buy you two a house. No way he'll let his grandchild live in an apartment. But the worst was yet to come. Kyle hesitated before playing the next one. She's such an idiot, James's voice, slightly slurred. Can't even satisfy me in bed. Thank God for Amanda, and Julie. And what's her name from accounting? Just be careful, honey, Linda again. Don't let Maya catch you. At least not until we've squeezed every penny we can out of her. The phone slipped from my numb fingers. Kyle caught it. Could you? My voice cracked. Could you send those to me? He nodded, quickly tapping on his phone. I heard the notification sounds on mine as the files came through. Kyle stood up, gathering his things. At the door, he turned back. I'm sorry, he said quietly. They're all snakes, you know? Always have been, even Mom. He shrugged. Guess that's why they hate me so much. I can't pretend like they do. The door closed behind him with a soft click, leaving me alone in the trash department. Alone with the truth about my marriage. About my husband. About the past 2 years of my life. I didn't bother cleaning up the mess in the apartment. Let it be a perfect metaphor for my marriage, a beautiful facade hiding absolute garbage underneath. Instead, I got in my car and drove straight to Linda and Tom's house, where I knew they'd all be having their Sunday family dinner. They were all there, exactly as I'd pictured them, James, Linda, Tom, and Rachel, gathered around the dining table like some Norman Rockwell painting of family unity. The scene made me sick. Maya, Linda's fake smile appeared instantly. We weren't expecting you. How was your parents' house? I ignored her completely, fixing my eyes on James. Show me the rental agreement for our apartment. The room went silent. James's fork paused halfway to his mouth. What? The rental agreement, the lease, show it to me. He recovered quickly, plastering on that charming smile I'd once loved. Oh, honey, you know Mr. Johnson doesn't do formal contracts. We've known each other for years. Mr. Johnson doesn't exist, I cut him off. The apartment belongs to you. Always has. Linda jumped in quickly, her voice high and nervous. Maya, dear, would you like some pot roast? I tried that recipe you mentioned. Shut up, Linda. My voice was ice cold. They all stared at me in shock. I'd never spoken to any of them like that before. James, what have you been doing with my $3,000 every month for the past 2 years? He chuckled, but I could see sweat breaking out on his forehead. Come on, Maya, it's not a big deal. So I own the apartment, what difference does it make? We're married. What difference? I pulled out my phone. Let's see what difference it makes. The color drained from their faces as James's voice filled the room. It's perfect. $3,000 a month, straight into my pocket. She doesn't even question it. I played recording after recording. Their own voices condemned them. The plotting, the manipulation, the mockery. James's boasts about his mistresses. Linda and Rachel's schemes for extracting gifts. Their plans for getting me pregnant to secure more money from my father. When I finally stopped the playback, you could have heard a pin drop. James was ghost white. Rachel looked like she might throw up. Linda's carefully maintained makeup couldn't hide her terror. I'm divorcing you, I said to James, my voice steady. Expect the papers this week. If you try to contact me for anything other than the divorce proceedings, these recordings go public. I'm sure the business community would love to hear how you scammed your wife out of $72,000. I turned and walked out, their protests falling on deaf ears. I drove back to the apartment, his apartment, and packed my things methodically, efficiently. By sunset, my car was loaded, and I was on my way to my parents' house. Mom and Dad were still up when I arrived. One look at my face, and they knew something was terribly wrong. I told them everything, showing them the recordings. Dad's face grew darker with each revelation. I'll handle this, he said when I finished, and he did. James was fired the next day, and Dad made sure his reputation in the business world was thoroughly destroyed. The divorce proceedings were quick. James tried to fight it at first, but the recordings changed everything. The judge was particularly interested in the financial fraud aspect. James walked away with nothing but his apartment and his ruined reputation. 3 months later, I was back at headquarters, throwing myself into work, slowly rebuilding my life. That's when I got a text from Kyle. We met for coffee. He looked different, more mature, less angry. I got a job at the car wash, he told me. Moved out of Mom's house after they found out I was the one who gave you the recordings. Best decision I ever made. I could help you, I offered. Get you a position at the company. He shook his head, smiling slightly. Thanks, but I need to do this on my own. Clean slate, you know? Besides, I'm saving up for community college. I understood completely. Sometimes the only way forward is to leave everything behind and build something new, something true, from the ground up. That night, I stood in my new apartment, my actual rental, with a real lease in my name, and looked at myself in the mirror. The woman looking back at me wasn't the same person who fell for James's charm 2 years ago. She was stronger, wiser, and finally, genuinely free. I picked up my phone and deleted their numbers one by one. The last light of day caught the diamond on my ring finger, my grandmother's ring now, not the one James had given me, and scattered into 1,000 points of light. Outside my window, the city was coming alive with evening energy, full of possibilities and new beginnings. I was ready for mine.
Even though a police officer visited my house, I didn't panic because it was a familiar face. However, I was too naive. My heart rate skyrocketed when I heard the officer's words. I'm arresting your wife on suspicion of fraud. I need to interrogate her immediately. As soon as Chris Miller said that, he pushed me away, ignoring my attempt to stop him, and forced his way into the house. Then he made a serious declaration. The victim, who claims to have been defrauded, says they will forgive her if they get their money back. Can you cover the $10,000 loss right now, $10,000. I can't do that immediately, I replied. Chris Miller, dissatisfied with my answer, coldly stated, Then I'll take your wife with me. We can't tolerate people who cunningly deceive others out of their money. At first, I was confused, but the more I listened, the more it didn't add up. Did my wife really commit fraud? She's been hospitalized for 2 years. Excuse me, your wife is supposed to be working for a major trading company, right? As I listened to Chris Miller's story, doubts grew stronger in my mind. My name is Mike Jones. I am a company employee in my 30s. Though I'm in my prime working years, I can't fully focus on my job. My family members are my wife, Nancy, and our third-grade son, James. Nancy has been hospitalized for the past 2 years due to her health issues. Believing that Nancy's condition will improve, I finish work on time to dedicate myself to household chores and parenting. After 2 years, I become accustomed to this lifestyle, efficiently handling laundry and cooking while helping James with his homework. Sometimes I have to work on weekends, but I still manage to visit Nancy with James 2 or 3 times a month. Most of my thoughts are occupied with wanting Nancy to get better soon. But recently, something else has been troubling me. I've been sensing some unsettling activity around our neighborhood. One day, after stopping by the supermarket on my way home from work, I noticed a person dressed as a police officer loitering nearby. Good evening. Are you on patrol? Is something wrong? I asked. The officer seemed surprised, not having noticed me behind him. Apologizing for startling him, I inquired further. He took out his badge and spoke in a hushed tone. There have been several reports of suspicious individuals in this area. An adult wearing sunglasses and a mask has been approaching children. Please be cautious and report any suspicious persons. After showing me his badge with his photo and the name Chris Miller, he explained that there seemed to be some dangerous people lurking around here. As I thought about warning James when I got home, Chris Miller just glanced at me and left. I just met a police officer. There have been some suspicious people around lately, so be careful, James. I urged James to be cautious while putting away the groceries. He responded absent-mindedly while doing his homework. He's becoming more boyish, but he also seems to ignore what I say, which worries me. Are you even listening? I asked in exasperation, but my mind suddenly filled with something else. James, sorry, I forgot to set the slow cooker this morning. I'll cook it now, so take a bath first. I hurriedly opened the slow cooker, and the rising steam made me cough. Calm down, Dad, James said, exasperated this time. I had turned it on also. You keep putting the laundry in the wrong place. Please remember after one reminder. At work, people praise me for handling household chores and parenting alone, but James is much more responsible than I am. It's probably because of such a son that we've managed even without Nancy. If your mom doesn't come home soon, we'll be troubling you, James. I joked. James pursed his lips tightly. It's fine. I'll help around the house. Mom needs to get better first. Even when she comes back, I'll keep helping at home. James said, tears in his eyes and a furrowed brow. James believes that Nancy ended up hospitalized because he caused her trouble. There was a day when we visited Nancy, and due to the side effects of her medication, she lost all her energy and vomited repeatedly in front of James. If James isn't a good boy, it makes things hard for Mom. Before Nancy's illness was discovered, James had been scolded by her with these words, and it stuck with him strongly. That's why he vowed never to trouble his mother again. Let's visit Mom this weekend. She's looking forward to seeing how well you're doing in school. Now, let's finish your homework after dinner. Saying this cheerfully, James seemed happy about seeing Nancy and excitedly helped with the meal preparations. The week passed quickly, and the day to visit Nancy arrived. James, in a good mood since morning, said enthusiastically, "Let's buy the cheesecake Mom likes before we go. I don't think she can eat heavy stuff, but if she doesn't want it, you can eat it." I replied. With that, we bought a popular cheesecake at the station's gift shop and visited the hospital room. Nancy seemed relatively well that day, but had a troubled expression. I took the chance to talk to her while James went to the bathroom. Though relieved it wasn't about her health, the content was disturbing. Recently, I've been getting silent phone calls. They don't say anything, but the call is definitely connected. Sometimes it lasts up to 5 minutes. That's creepy. Actually, there have been police patrolling around our place because of some suspicious individuals. The world is a dangerous place. Whether from news reports or social media, all I hear is bad news. I hope Nancy's health improves soon, and we can have a peaceful life, but it's hard not to worry these days. But silent calls must be mentally exhausting. You haven't reported this to the police yet, right? There's no direct harm, and I didn't think anyone would come to the hospital to cause trouble. What are you saying? It's too late if something happens. I'll talk to the police patrolling near our house. As we were talking, James returned. Since James was looking forward to this visit, we decided to end our heavy conversation. We enjoyed the cheesecake and had a pleasant chat together. The following week, when I returned from work, I saw Chris Miller patrolling. I thought it was a good opportunity to discuss the silent calls, but he was deep in conversation with James. Officer, thank you for your service, James. Have you finished your homework? I finished it a while ago. I was playing with my friends and just got back. I nodded at James's reply and then turned to Chris Miller. Sorry to bother you at work, but I'm concerned about something. Could I have a moment of your time? Of course, what's going on? Having someone around to protect us is incredibly reassuring. However, I didn't want James to hear about this. He's already worried about Nancy. And knowing about the silent calls would affect his studies and daily life. James, could you go home and warm this up for me? What? No. I want to hear what you're talking about. This has nothing to do with you, James. Go inside now. I asked James to warm up the food I bought, but he refused. Sensing my intent, Chris Miller stepped in to help. James, you're such a good helper at home. That's impressive. However, James wasn't easily swayed by such simple words. Feeling bad for holding up Chris Miller, I decided to leave, but he said, I'm around here every day, so feel free to talk to me anytime. And left. I thanked him and waved goodbye with James. Back home, as James and I were eating dinner, he started talking with his mouth full of food. That officer is really a nice guy, isn't he? Yeah, we should appreciate the tough job of protecting our town. By the way, what were you talking about before I got here? Did he mention any new sightings? Remembering James's serious conversation with Chris Miller, I asked casually. However, James's response clouded my mind. He asked if you always come home at this time, when Mom is coming back, and if anyone else lives with us. He said there have been burglaries around here. I had never heard of any burglaries in the neighborhood. Maybe he was concerned about whether we live alone or have support because James is still young. But it felt intrusive, like our life was being scrutinized. I hope nothing happens and we can live peacefully, James. Remember not to share too much about our home with others, okay? James seemed unconvinced, but he replied, okay. So I left it at that. About a month later, as we were getting ready to visit Nancy, the intercom rang. Visitors were rare, so I assumed it was a salesperson. Looking at the monitor, I saw Chris Miller. Good morning. Is everything okay? I greeted him while opening the door. Even though a police officer visited my house, I didn't panic because it was a familiar face. However, I was too complacent. My heart rate skyrocketed when I heard Chris Miller's words. I'm arresting your wife on suspicion of fraud. I need to interrogate her immediately. As soon as Chris Miller said that, he pushed past me, ignoring my attempt to stop him, and forced his way into the house. Can we talk? I have a child, so could we speak at the door? I lowered my voice so James, who was getting ready inside, wouldn't hear, but Chris Miller ignored this and barged into the living room. Then he made a serious declaration. Your wife is under suspicion of committing a crime. The victim, who claims to have been defrauded, says they will forgive her if they get their money back. Can you cover the $10,000 loss right now? $10,000? I can't do that immediately, I muttered, not understanding the situation. Trying to cover living expenses for two and Nancy's treatment costs on a single income left us with almost no savings. The ample savings we had when Nancy was working were nearly depleted now. Then I'll take your wife with me. We can't tolerate people who cunningly deceive and extort money from the vulnerable. Listening to Chris Miller, I felt a disconnect with the image of Nancy I knew. Are you sure my wife committed fraud? She's been hospitalized for the past 2 years. What? Your wife is supposed to be working for a major trading company, right? Hearing Chris Miller's words, my doubts began to grow. How does Chris Miller know Nancy's previous workplace? It's possible James mentioned it, but he doesn't know what a trading company is and couldn't clearly answer about Nancy's job, often turning it into a joke. Even though he's a police officer, it's unlikely he knows every resident's occupation. If he had checked, he would know Nancy had retired. Chris Miller, can I see your police ID again? He visibly showed signs of agitation at my request. At this point, I was convinced he wasn't a real police officer, but I didn't want to push too hard and provoke him. James was in the house, and I needed to avoid any danger to him. Chris Miller quickly regained his composure, trying to maintain a facade of authority. If your wife isn't here, you'll have to come with me. What will it be? Will you come to the station with me, or will you settle by paying the money? Of course, I'll have to handcuff you on the way to the police station. Looking outside, I noticed there was no police car. Although he had handcuffs, they didn't seem very solid and looked fake. They looked like something you could buy at a toy store. I couldn't pay the money, but I also didn't want to be taken away without knowing what might happen. I grabbed my smartphone, pretending to be scared, and pleaded with Chris Miller. I have a relative who can lend me the money. Can I call to ask them to transfer it? That way, James and I don't have to leave here, right? Chris Miller thought for a moment and then nodded. Fine, but you make the call here. If you try to escape, I'll have to call for backup. Thank you, I said, opening the Contacts app. I wanted to call the police, but Chris Miller would overhear the conversation and was watching my every move. So, I decided to contact an intelligent friend of mine who is a lawyer. He knew about Nancy's illness and often visited her. Please pick up. My wish was granted when he answered after a few rings. Sorry to call you suddenly, but can you lend me about $10,000? I promise I'll pay you back. What's going on? He asked, worried. I continued speaking. Nancy allegedly committed fraud by visiting an elderly person's home and tricking them out of their money. If we pay $10,000 right away, it should settle everything. Please help. Wait, but Nancy. Please, the police are in my house right now. They said it could be settled this way. It probably seemed odd to him, but that was fine. As I continued explaining, he seemed to understand the situation. You're at home, right? He confirmed, then said, I'll transfer the money today. Just wait. And hung up. The money issue should be resolved. I'll pay by today. I told Chris Miller, who nodded in satisfaction. Then transfer the money to the account I'll give you. If I assist you, it could jeopardize my position. Once I confirm the payment, I won't bother you again. He handed me a note with the account details and headed for the door. As I opened the door, a loud voice shouted from the room. Mom wouldn't do that. You're a liar. Apparently, James had been listening, and he glared at Chris Miller, his shoulders heaving with anger. Chris Miller looked surprised by James's outburst, but quickly regained his composure, thinking he was just a child. James, I understand you don't want to believe it, but your mom committed a crime. People must pay for their wrongdoings. James, reacting to the word criminal, became even more furious and confronted Chris Miller. Shut up. You're the criminal. It's you who will be caught when the police are called. Hearing James's loud commotion at the entrance, neighbors started to gather, wondering what was happening. Seeing the police among them, the crowd of onlookers quickly grew. Panicking, Chris Miller tried to make an excuse and escape. Seizing the moment, James shouted loudly, "That man is a bad person, catch him." The onlookers, reacting to James's call, restrained Chris Miller. As he tried to break free and run, the neighbors fully tackled and restrained him. At almost the same time, a police car arrived. The real police had come. I felt immense relief, but knew I couldn't appear weak while James was showing such bravery. I walked toward the officer who stepped out of the police car to explain the situation. The officer checked my name and said, "We received a report from someone claiming to be your friend." I then explained the situation. I mentioned that someone claimed my wife was suspected of fraud and said that paying the money would settle it. The officers shook their heads, saying, "That's impossible." He had been patrolling around our place recently and had a police ID, so I didn't suspect anything. I said, "The police took the ID from Chris Miller. They said it was a well-made fake and that no one named Chris Miller worked in their department. It was indeed a scam with someone pretending to be a police officer." Chris Miller struggled desperately as they tried to put him into the police car. "I was just following orders. It's not my fault. Besides, this guy's wife works for a major company, and they're rich. Rich people should share some money with the poor." His baseless and selfish words infuriated me. Before I could say anything, James shouted back at him, "My mom is fighting an illness and is in the hospital. My dad works hard for us. Don't act like you're the only one suffering." Chris Miller fell silent after James's outburst. The gathered neighbors also agreed with James, applauding and supporting him. Unable to respond, Chris Miller quietly got into the police car. It turned out that my friend had called the police, sensing something was wrong from our phone conversation. According to my lawyer friend, Chris Miller, who used a fake name and pretended to be a cop, would be appropriately punished. Later, the police informed me that Chris Miller was also involved in other incidents besides this one. The silent calls to Nancy were also from Chris Miller, suggesting he had some malicious scheme. He had a history of fraud, deceiving people to obtain money and illegal profits. He held seminars with a group, claiming they would invest the money and give returns, but hardly invested any of it. He returned about 10% as dividends, and then lied about investment failures to embezzle the rest. Handling others' money requires a license, which Chris Miller didn't have. Additionally, forging a police ID is a crime. Given his numerous offenses, my lawyer friend and the police believe he will receive a heavy sentence. He must pay for his crimes. And the most important thing is that James wasn't harmed. The police and neighbors praised you, James. They said you stood up well against a bad adult. James upheld his sense of justice and fought against the villain. As a parent, it was a nerve-wracking action, but I was proud of James's bravery. Embarrassed by the praise, James blushed and looked away, saying, "It's nothing. You knew our kind mom would never do something like that, right?" "Of course, I believe in both mom and you, James." Hearing my words, James smiled happily. Despite everything, I was just glad nothing serious happened. "Did you finish your homework?" I asked James. He widened his eyes and hurried to his room. "Oh no, I have an essay due tomorrow." I sighed, saying, "Oh boy." But I was relieved that our usual routine had returned. Later, the incident was briefly mentioned in a local newspaper. The headline read, "Bravery of elementary school student leads to arrest." "Mom, this is about me." James insisted on bringing the newspaper to show Nancy during our visit. Even though I had already told her, and the hospital had several newspapers, including the local one, Nancy acted surprised as if she was seeing it for the first time. "No way, is that really you, James? It can't be." "It's true, look, it says James Jones right here." As James eagerly pointed out his name, Nancy reacted with exaggerated surprise, making James even more excited. Watching the two of them with a smile, I also told Nancy about what happened. James was really brave, he shouted. My mom would never do that, and scared the criminal. Did James really say that? He's grown up so much, thank you, Nancy said, patting James's head. For some reason, James had tears in his eyes. When Nancy, looking concerned, asked, "What's wrong?" James replied in a small voice, "I've been good and tried hard, so I wouldn't trouble you. Please get better soon. I think you got sick because of me." Nancy gently hugged James as he started to cry. "This illness isn't your fault, James. God gave me this challenge, but it's one I can overcome. It's going to be okay." Nancy then seemed to remember something and added, "I once said, if you don't behave, Mom will get sick. But that wasn't true. I'm sorry I said that." Tears filled Nancy's eyes too, and the sound of their sniffles echoed in the hospital room. The doctor said, "If I keep improving like this, I might be able to go home soon. I'm going to keep trying, so please wait for me." Recently, Nancy seemed to be doing really well. If things continued as the doctor said, she might be discharged soon. I prayed with all my heart for that to come true. A few months later, Nancy's battle with illness came to an end. There were times we didn't know what would happen. But thanks to the doctor's dedicated treatment and Nancy's efforts, she was able to return to a normal life. Today is James's open house at school. It's been a long time since Nancy and I have gone to see James at school together. James has become quite responsible, Nancy said. Indeed, James stood confidently in front of the blackboard. Today's theme for the open house was Dreams for the Future, and the students were presenting essays they had written. I remembered seeing James revising his essay several times a few months ago. I usually check his homework, but he insisted on keeping this essay a secret, so today was the first time I would hear it. My dream for the future is to become a police officer. I have caused a lot of trouble for my dad and mom, but from now on, I won't cause any more trouble. I've been treated kindly by many people, and I want to repay their kindness by becoming a police officer. I know there are many kind people around me, but I've also experienced that not everyone in the world is kind. I want to protect my loved ones from such people. I've learned that becoming a police officer isn't easy, but my mom taught me that we can overcome any challenge. She faced a tough illness but fought hard and is recovering. I want to grow up to be an adult who doesn't give up, just like my mom. If anything happens, I'll protect my dad and mom." Hearing James speak passionately, Nancy and I couldn't help but cry. I made a firm vow to become a father who can protect his family